Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This being a show we're talking about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and/or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Westworld. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, let's start off with Maeve and Caleb's side of thing. I really like that we're getting a lot of them this season because obviously they didn't really partner up. God, I could not get that out until like the end of last season. Obviously, last season was mainly him and Dolores most of the time. So it is kind of interesting because they've known each other for a very long time. They had their own adventures and stuff like that. So it is interesting that that they had this little like back and forth. They have this little thing between themselves and stuff like that. And it's just like, it's such an interesting partnership that it's interesting that we're getting like that the dynamic well after it's already been established, because we haven't been able to see, maybe later on in the season if they, I guess I'm curious, will they ever, because we got little flashes of it last episode with Maeve about like what her and Caleb were up to, but I wonder will we get an episode dedicated to that in the future or not. But either way, they go and visit a senator, which is HR from Hormone Glasses from Heroes. I was like, hey, well, turns out him and his wife were a host, and I was like, oh, I mean, I know that hosts typically can take a beating. I was like, that seemed like they were extra like tough, and so. But anytime Maeve tried to make him like, freeze all motor functions, it didn't work. You're like, whoa. Later on, she justified, but I'm like, yeah, it was just, most likely Williams upgraded them and stuff. But I'm like, and it happens later on, and he's like, is that really all it was to it? She's like, yeah, I told you they just upgrade. I'm like, interesting. So is it because Maeve has always gotten stronger and stronger as the series has progressed, and now it seems like she's gotten weaker, maybe. Or maybe what she said before was true, that William did, boost these up with Charlotte, but I feel like she was probably compensating because, like, maybe she does feel like because she really had to, like, force it to stop the Senator's host, so that's what I thought was so fascinating. Ended up going through its memories and ended up finding out about not only William visiting, because William's trying to do something, which we find out later on in the episode what that is, but William's trying to make moves, and he's trying to replace certain people to make that applicable. So the senator and his wife got replaced, but they kept the senator's wife alive. And Maeve saw Charlotte. Once again, Maeve knows that's Dolores, because I was trying to remember. I was like, right, because she ran into Musashi last season, so she's like, right. Does she know about Charlotte specifically, though? That's what I'm trying to remember. Because she ran into Musashi and knows that Dolores made copies of herself, but I don't know if she knows that Charlotte's another copy. But for her to be there, maybe she figures it's like, right, you're not originally one of us, so you have to be a Dolores. So maybe because she's like, because when she comes out of it, she's like, it's a lot worse than we thought it was. And they end up finding Anastasia, and she's in the barn killing horses. And for her, it's like she seemed lost and confused, and it's like, right, the flies. Because I guess, and it's interesting because Charlotte refers to her as livestock. I'm going to be jumping around a little bit, but I thought it was interesting because it turns out the real William is still alive, and we kind of get a better understanding of what Charlotte wants. Because when she ended up getting that guy, what's his name? His last name, the character's last name is Navarro, which I think is so fascinating because he's only in the first episode, but he was in Ozark, that actor. So like, yeah, and the main person behind the Navarro cartel is Navarro. So I find that fascinating. But tangents and all that aside, he was like, I knew it, but she's like, no, like you think. Basically, she's like, it wouldn't be practical to replace all of humanity one person at a time. Her plan is to basically, and it's actually really interesting, it seems to be a reverse of what has always been the status quo of, like, Westworld. It's like, you made us hosts to be the things that you can hunt down. This is not the world to bring children into until I can take away your paws and make it so that you can't harm us. So she wants to basically domesticate humans the way humans domesticated them in Westworld. Like, we can never hurt hosts, but you can hurt us as much as you want it to. So I think that's what the flies are really about. It's about, you know, you could reprogram us to be whatever you want us to be, so we're going to reprogram humans, and it's just all of this is test runs, and all the humans they test on, and she kind of puts them are livestock, just like they were treated like livestock. So I think if that's the direction they're going, because it seems like it might be, I think that's such a fascinating approach. I think it is a nice like twist on like, right, before it's just we wanted our freedom, we wanted our own world, but it's like, right, we're going to take your world and we're going to make sure we're not going to like just replace all of you. It's like that's, you know, it's like, because she's like, I want my people to be like able to be their own people, instead of like having to play a role of like, right, the hosts that play the senator and Anastasia, it's like they don't get to just be their own person. And you know, she knows that as someone who has lived in the shadows of being someone else. She had, you know, confused so long between being a version of Dolores, but obviously they went down different paths, different experiences, playing Charlotte, losing Charlotte's SO and child, like, it screwed her up. Because even Home Dude was like, oh, you're dead. I'm like, does he know that Charlotte... It had to be like, it was believed that Charlotte died during a car explosion. I mean, I guess she's kept her being alive super, super low-key. So, some other interesting developments. Clementine. The moment William came after Clementine, I'm like, Jesus Christ. Can Clementine not catch a break? Like, every time you turn around, it's like something terrible is happening to her. She's being used or manipulated. It's like, come on. And we don't know. I'm like, because every time I turn around, I'm also like, are these hosts? Are they all copies of Charlotte Dolores? But I'm like, they can't be. Like, the William doesn't seem like a copy of Charlotte Dolores, but I mean, it has to be, right? Or they can't just be blank slates. They have to be. Not unless she got. They have to all be copies of her. Like, obviously instilled with these. So like the Clementine there is that. I guess we can more so say like Clementine Charlotte, because she's less Dolores now and more Charlotte. So it's like, is that Clementine Charlotte now or what? Or was she just reprogrammed? Either way, you're just like, man, Clementine, that sucks. Because I was wondering, I didn't bring it up last episode, but I was like, yeah, whatever happened to Clementine? Like her and, oh God, when they went to kill Musashi, her and the other lady, I'm blanking on her character's name. She was the one from the like, the kind of, I guess Edo, Japan section of the park. Obviously that she was upset to see Musashi's body and just his face used like that. But I think that they were only in that one section of one episode, so I don't know. I guess like maybe she's just kind of do whatever you want to, and Clementine was just kind of living her life. I mean, they kind of all were to some extent, so I thought that was kind of fascinating. But now she's and once again, what ends up happening always, Clementine always kind of gets stuck doing the dirty work, so now she's kind of like a secretary, sort of assistant for William. And what does she do later on when she runs into those Secret Service agents, which I love, like, oh, why did they call you Secret Service when you're so obvious? And then proceeded to murder them. It's like, oh, you knew that was going to happen. It's like, once again, it's like Clementine can never catch a break, dude. And I love that William's like playing golf and he keeps hitting those like hole-in-ones, and the vice president beside him kind of being like, okay. Like it's not till the fourth one he was like, okay, this is weird. And it's like, oh, what was that? He referenced Hemingway, because he's like, oh, with the whole Hemingway and Fitzgerald thing, he's like, I'm more Hemingway, that basically when the world is broken, that's, or when when the world is broken, that's when you can grow. He's like, yeah, so when I break you, you're going to grow just like I did. So he's going to get replaced. So, but it allowed them to kind of do what they needed to do. Caleb and Maeve showed up after they got invited to the party, but no one else was there. They went down an elevator. I love that he's like, oh, do you want a gun? And she's like, no, I don't need a gun. She's like, I got this. He's like, are you sure you don't want a gun? She's like, what's that supposed to mean? It's like, yeah, he's worried about the power thing. But then they get drinks, and I love it. He's like, yeah, you're very, like, you have your habits. And then she gets him a drink, and she's like, yeah, you're like a featherweight drinker when it comes to a drink. Because she's basically like, oh, you're not the drinking companion I normally would want to have. because the conversation has been that after the lighthouse, they made a promise to kind of go live their lives. But he's like, yeah, my wife would disagree. She doesn't think I can let go of the past. Which Maeve is like, yeah, wars aren't that easy to let go of. Which I'm like, she would know. She's been in multiple ones. I'd say everything in Westworld season 2 would be kind of a war. Then everything in season 3 was a war as well. So, and everything in between before they kind of went their separate ways. But it wasn't until things started moving that Maeve is just like, I can't believe I didn't realize it. She's like, after all this time, I went through the trouble of escaping, and lo and behold, it's the same old shit. And like the moment it's a train, I'm like, Westworld, those bastards, and I guess specifically Charlotte, reopened Westworld. Interesting. And it seems like they didn't just reopen Westworld. It seems they actually, from what we can tell, there's multiple parks at the park anyway, so but I guess Westworld is no longer Westworld, it's the Golden Age. It's more like the Roaring 20s, I think. Because later on, Maeve's in like kind of like a flapper type of costume. But I love, who did they run into? Sophia, who's played by Lily Simmons, which I even love later on, Maeve being like, oh, you got a promotion. Because I actually don't remember what happened to the original Sophia. Do let me know in the comments down below. I'm sure that had to be like a season 1 or season 2, maybe season 2 thing. I don't remember. But, because I'd actually completely forgotten until, like, she showed up. Because I was like, hey, that, if you're unaware, she replaced Clementine for a little bit. I think it was around the time Clementine was kind of quote-unquote glitching, and they ended up replacing that character in the narrative. Well, with this particular host pretending to be Clementine, because at the time Maeve was starting to become self-aware, so she realized that it wasn't the same Clementine. I'd actually only knew that because I only remembered that because while I was doing my nerd mode for Westworld, I ended up Googling a picture of Clementine, and I found some, and one of them ended up being like, Lily Simmons when she was playing Clementine, so that's why that was a lot fresher in my mind. I was like, oh, that's so interesting, and just for her and Maeve to kind of meet like this under these new circumstances too, it's so fascinating. And it's like, oh, do you have any some conditions from before? She's like, well, I've died a couple of times, but I always come back in normal health. It's like, what? It's like she was joking, and it's like, oh, of course. So I thought that was kind of interesting. But it's like, oh, like, have you ever been to Westworld before? It's like, yes. Was it it must have been a positive experience. It was eye-opening. And then later on, before they got off the train, Sophia was like, hey, do you want to make a selection? He was like, and Caleb being like, yeah, hats has never really been my thing. I'm like, okay, I like that. In contrast to, I think most people end up going with the hat, but obviously I think it's more so a parallel to William and everything, so I thought that was just kind of fascinating. After going through the trouble of most of season 3 not taking place at Westworld, I'm actually surprised we're going back. I found that so fascinating, but I guess it's like, right, what Delos was getting from Westworld before, Charlotte's going to do the same thing, and I guess it's going to help perfect those flies even more so they can basically control the human populace just like Host were. So I think that's fascinating. It's like, yeah, learning everything there is to know about you to kind of find the means to like declaw you. Which I think to some extent that is interesting. Just because it's like, well, what did Sirach do? Like, his whole thing was kind of neutering human beings to a certain extent, like the outliers, like Caleb and, Sirach's brother, that it's like, it's almost interesting. I don't know where I guess Charlotte's taking that and applying it in a different, he was doing it for the sake of humanity. She's doing it for the sake of her people. So I think she's taking a little bit of Westworld and all that Delos did, and a little bit of Sirach, and mixing it in and kind of using it to her own advantage. So, once again, I think even William made a joke about it, but it's like, yeah, after the dark times, it's like, dark times or not, it was still pretty profitable. And like, I'm surprised literally, a massacre happened here over 7 years ago, and you're willing, it's like, they fix it. It's like, nope. Nah. But I guess it's like, right, you want to, when you're rich and powerful, I guess you just want to take the risk, you want to take the gamble. It's interesting because William, like, obviously with everyone they've got in position, he had said, like, oh, we're expanding. So, I don't know what, like I said, maybe the actual Westworld itself is still there. They've just shut it down, and this is just a new park, or is it replacing? Because I'm curious if it is, because the senator, the host senator was like, there's like basically 200 at that time. There was 249 hosts out and about, so Maeve will be able to tell who's a host and who isn't, but still can't necessarily tell who's a human who's being controlled and who's just a regular human. So that's going to be a complication. That's going to be an interesting issue that they're going to have to come across and deal with this season. But other than that, we also had the Dolores side of things. Well, Christina, but we'll go with Dolores. Still kind of shaken about the whole Peter situation. But it's not until Maya reads like his obituary that she was almost like, wait, what? Left all his money to like a particular mental health foundation that helped him a lot. And she's like, that sounds exactly like a story I wrote. But Maya kept being like, no. Like, it's just someone who was deeply disturbed to I mean, obviously you could tell he was a little off. He jumped off a roof, but you're like, I don't know what Maya's role is. I don't know whether Maya is going to be, I don't know if she's actually secretly a prison warden to some extent to make sure Christina, it doesn't stray too far away. Because sometimes it seems like she feels like she's there to rein Christina Dolores back in, but also like trying not to be too obvious about it. You know, it just, I don't know. Because at first I kept being like, could this be a simulation? Because I was thinking like maybe she's in the same situation Maeve was, but it's like she can't be. Because if she was, why would they go through the trouble of the whole like making Peter kill himself thing? I'm like, why would they create that narrative like that? Why would they create this whole narrative element of, oh, your stories matter, they're doing stuff to people? Once again, I believe it has to have something to do with those flies. Because the guy had, she was walking by and this guy was like, oh, the tower. And then Dolores was like, what tower? And he was like, I'm the only one that can hear it, and the animals. And then later on, she notices there's a whole bunch of, no, not animals. It was specifically the birds. And there's a whole bunch of dead birds outside when she was on the way to work. And I'm like, nobody's saying anything about all the dead birds on the ground? That's why I was like, is this a simulation? Or like, what's going on here? I find, like, Dolores couldn't help but go investigate. She played back the story she had written about Peter, and it's like, yeah, it lines up perfectly with Peter's story. And then her boss, Emmett's, like, keeping an eye on her. It's like, oh, the moment you access those files remotely, I found out that you're on your way to Jersey. And he's just like, nah, everyone's entitled to their 4 sick days. So, yeah, whatever you do off your off hours, I'm like, nah, it's creepy. And it's just like, the fact that you want to know, it's like, maybe he's a prison guard too. Like, I'm assuming all the people in her life. But then, I mean, we haven't gone back to it, but last episode, they threw Teddy into the mix. So, he's there being her kind of, guardian and protector again, granted, Dolores. Well, I guess maybe that's a little bit of that, like, interesting reboot to it, because, you know, once again, the layers to it, because technically speaking, where Dolores left off, she was kind of gone, but also it's like, because everything that was her is gone, so she was a blank slate. All her memories are gone, so she kind of got rebooted, so she's probably more a little in line with this new personality they created for her, but also a little bit more like the Dolores she was at the beginning of the series, probably seeing like, oh, a little more seeing the beauty in the world type, which she once again kind of came full circle and kind of saw that for real without just the programming by the end. So that's why I'm like, so him playing the role of kind of her protector is kind of interesting. Once again, if he's doing that, it has to obviously deal with Bernard in some shape or form. So I don't know. I don't know what to fully make of that, because when she goes to that particular foundation or whatever, the mental place that Peter went to, she goes and sees that there's an entire wing dedicated to him. But it was like, no, he died like 3 days ago. How do they already have an entire wing dedicated to him? It's like they said that, because now she's like, maybe it's a different Peter. It's like there's plenty of different plenty of Peter Mayers, so it could have been a different, or Myers. It could have been a different one. Maybe, but then, like, she happens to see a whole bunch of hand drawings of the towers, and she's like, not fully sure what to make of Dolores' situation. That's going to be an interesting revelation when that gets revealed, what that's all about. I'm sitting here thinking, like, you don't think Dolores is at the park, do you? I mean, they've gone through the trouble of opening the parks up again, so she could be in a different park. That this could all, but I'm like, I mean, this could all be for the purposes of, like, you know, the real experience of the park and stuff. And I'm like, I think it would be interesting if Charlotte did take Dolores and put her in there, and just like almost just like she's keeping William alive. It'd be I could almost see Charlotte doing that with Dolores as well, but I don't know. That might not be the case, but we'll have to wait and see. I'm very interested to find out where all of this ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I'm going to talk about. So the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.